Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, found its way into the hearts of millions of children. I was one of them. And maybe you were too. We grew up with Snow White's songs, the rhythmic clinking of the dwarfs' pickaxes as they marched home after a long day of work. Those trembling, warm, and dreamlike frames felt like the very first dreams we believed were real. But then, in 2025, Disney decided to retell that story in a way none of us ever expected. Snow White is now a woman of color, the prince becomes a thief. But that's not even the worst part. Let's take a look at 7 ways Snow White 2025 managed to destroy one of the most beautiful legends of our childhood. The magic is gone, fairy tales. Now come in CGI. Wish upon a star, and if your heart is in it, your wish will soon come true. That was one of the opening lines in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, and it meant everything to the audience back then. To them, the film was a real-life miracle. Every frame was hand-drawn, every character's movement the result of painstaking care, attention, and passion. Almost a century has passed, and now the artists who once breathed life into a smiling forest, into chirping birds, and into that princess's sparkling eyes are gone. 2D animation isn't completely dead, but the ink and paint technique, the very soul of the original Snow White, has nearly vanished. When we step into the 2025 version of Snow White, those wonders are no longer there. Even though the film tries to recreate the fairy tale world using modern technology, it's that very modernity that makes everything feel distant. The setting is green-screened, the forest is a CGI backdrop, and the side characters, including the Seven Dwarfs, are all computer-generated. The costumes lack color, missing the glowing charm of a fairy tale world, and instead look like cosplay forced into whatever's trending now. Everything looks clearer, sharper, but it's missing something vital. Emotion. Gone are the birds landing gently on Snow White's hand. Gone is the sunlight filtering through the trees like the forest's breath. These seemingly tiny details, they're gone now. The movie tries to strike a balance between realism and the original animation's charm, but it ends up stuck in the middle. Too real to feel like a dream, too fake to truly believe. A modern Snow White, but empty inside. In its marketing campaign, Snow White 2025 was presented as an upgrade, a version where the legendary princess is no longer a fragile girl waiting for love, but someone independent, strong, and in control of her own destiny. Not to mention, the actress playing her, Rachel Zegler, looks nothing like the classic fairy tale image. Lips red as blood, skin white as snow, hair black as ebony. If I were the director, this definitely wouldn't have happened. What about you? If you had the chance to direct the film, what would you do? Would you preserve the timeless values or replace them? Back to the story. Rachel Zegler even stated, "It's no longer 1937, and we really rewrote Snow White. She's not going to be saved by the prince. She's not going to be dreaming about true love anymore." And you know what? I agree with Rachel. It's not 1937 anymore. In 1937, they made great movies. For many of us who grew up with the original, the issue isn't the modern spirit itself, but the way it dismisses the values that made Snow White iconic in the first place. Kindness, belief in goodness, and a heart capable of love without calculation. Of course, every story can be rewritten, but if you're going to give Snow White more agency, then at the very least, the characters should be written with depth. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. Even though the film dropped the classic song "Someday My Prince Will Come," throughout the story, Snow White still spends most of her time waiting. Not for the prince, but for her father, the king, to return and fix everything. She still blindly trusts people who clearly seem suspicious, still falls into a trap, and in the end, still needs to be saved by a kiss. It's hard to call that a proactive female lead. The result is a Snow White branded as strong, but who comes across as cold and shallow. The gentle charm that made us care is gone, and there's not enough depth for us to truly understand her. And being modern doesn't have to mean erasing the heart of a fairy tale. Soulless acting, awkward dialogue, flat emotions. A movie can have cutting-edge visual effects and grand settings, but if it lacks emotion, then it's all just surface level. And unfortunately, that's exactly what Snow White 2025 fails to deliver. Rachel Zegler, in the lead role, is a young actress with talent and drive. There's no denying she has on-screen presence, and some of her singing scenes are decently performed. However, throughout the film, her portrayal of Snow White lacks emotional range. Her eyes feel empty. Her lines come out flat. At times, it sounds like she's reading from a script instead of living in the character. A princess who can't reach the audience's heart, that might be the biggest loss. Especially when we once saw a 1937 Snow White who could express a world of feeling with just a shy glance or a tilt of the head. As for the Queen, Gal Gadot steps into the villain role with a flawless appearance, seductive, regal, and clearly, dangerously beautiful. But that alone isn't enough. In the old animated version, the Queen haunted our childhoods, evil without needing an explanation, with every glance and every laugh sending chills. In the 2025 version, Gadot seems to be leaning into a camp style, an exaggerated, almost humorous kind of villain, as a way to modernize the role. But she ends up stuck between two extremes, not over the top enough to be memorable, not evil enough to be frightening. At times she looks like she's trying to enjoy the role, but most of the time it feels like she's just waiting for the next call from director James Gunn. And when both central forces of the story, the princess and the villain, lack emotional weight, the film loses its core. So what's left for the audience to truly connect with? The prince becomes a thief, and love is no longer magic. If there's one element that made Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs live forever in the hearts of audiences, it was the fairy tale romance. That vague, fleeting love between the princess and the prince somehow held the power to deeply move us. But in the 2025 remake, that love, the very soul of the story, seems to have been pushed aside. There is no prince. Instead, we get Jonathan, played by Andrew Burnap, a thief with a heart of gold, introduced as Snow White's new companion. Unfortunately, even though he shares more screen time with Snow White than the original prince did, that doesn't mean the relationship is any better. If we had to give him a name, Jonathan might just be Diet Flynn Rider, bland, predictable, and lacking a unique personality. The two characters exchange a few cute lines and some light banter, but there's no magic between them. We wouldn't mind if the leads had real chemistry, like in the live-action versions of Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast. But here, there's nothing. No lingering looks that make us believe they're falling for each other. No single moment deep enough to make us think this is a romance worth remembering. They've known each other for 2 days. But those 2 days bring no sense of growth, no emotional journey, no real challenges between them. And then, just like in the original, there's a kiss. But this time, it's not to wake the princess. It's to try and wake up the viewer's emotions. Sadly, it's not enough. A messy plot, forced messaging. Snow White was never meant to be grounded in reality. It's a fairy tale, and the filmmakers back then fully embraced that. By 2025, the remake seems determined to add depth by loading the story with big themes, feminism, oppression, even fascism, and a people's uprising. The ambition is there, but the execution is naive and shallow. Viewers don't see a clear emotional journey for the main character, nor any real struggle against evil. Conflicts are introduced only to be resolved quickly and without weight. The climax comes when Snow White returns to the kingdom, stands up to her stepmother, and calls for an end to the cycle of tyranny. The Queen has taken everything from us. Her cheap cliché lines somehow manage to convince everyone, villagers, guards, even the Queen's backup dancers, all suddenly thinking, you know what, we're tired of being oppressed. Let's have a half-baked revolution. This is our kingdom, and it's time we take it back. If things were that simple, the movie could have ended after the first 5 minutes. We've seen similar themes done well, like in The Hunger Games or Brave. But here, those messages feel like a surface-level paint job, slapped on to make the story seem more modern, without actually being woven into the heart of the narrative. The Seven Dwarfs vanished without a trace. In its effort to modernize, Disney chose to use CGI for the dwarfs, a decision seemingly made in response to comments by actor Peter Dinklage. As a trailblazer who challenged Hollywood's portrayal of little people, Dinklage questioned whether the image of the Seven Dwarfs was still appropriate in today's world. While Dinklage clearly broke down many barriers for the dwarf community, he doesn't represent all actors with dwarfism. Many criticize Disney for not casting dwarf actors, especially since most of the dwarfs are voiced by Martin Kleba, a dwarf himself. It becomes even more confusing when you realize that Jonathan's gang includes a dwarf member, George Appleby, who isn't hidden behind CGI at all. All of that makes the choice to hide the Seven Dwarfs behind digital effects even more puzzling. And sadly, the CGI designs just make the characters weird. Their faces look unnatural, their movements lack emotion, and worst of all, you can barely tell who's who. Think back to the original. You're called happy because you're happy, and I'm grumpy because I'm misunderstood. You could recognize each one just by a laugh or a glance. But in the 2025 version, you leave the theater without remembering a single name. Lost Universality. Who is this movie even for? Some movies aren't just something to watch. They're a place for generations to come together, to share, understand, and feel moved. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, was exactly that kind of film. But the 2025 version seems to have lost that. Despite costing over $250 million, this remake feels more like a middle school play. This time, it seems Disney has completely missed the core spirit of the original. As Walt Disney once said, "I do not make films primarily for children. I make films for the child in all of us, whether we're 6 or 60. And it's true, Snow White, 1937, was never just a kid's story. It didn't shy away from scaring young audiences with images that still haunt us to this day. At the same time, it had moments that thrilled and enchanted us. By the end, even adults could be brought to tears when they thought Snow White had passed away forever, making the happy ending all the more meaningful. It was that contrast between darkness and hope, fear and love, that allowed the film to touch adults just as deeply as it did children. The remake? It's too childish for adults, yet too dry for kids. The messages feel force-fed and not meant for a young audience, while the subtlety and emotion, the very things that made grown-ups cry, are completely absent. The result is a film that feels out of place. No one truly loves it. Kids watch it and forget. Adults watch it and feel disappointed. Fairy tales should be where we meet, not what drives us apart. And maybe that's the greatest loss of Snow White 2025. The failure of Snow White 2025 proves that classic works don't need to be remade to fit a modern mold. They just need to be appreciated for what they are. If you feel the same, disappointed, confused, or maybe just missing the sound of a certain song echoing through a forest long ago, leave a comment below. What memories of Snow White still live in you? How did the new live-action version make you feel? And if you want more videos like this, don't forget to hit follow, so we can keep preserving those beautiful memories that time is trying to erase.